Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Earwax. It's Colin, and today we're going to be doing a review of the brand new album from Sightseeing Crew, Muffled Ears, The World Sounds Bad Quality. Now, this is the second album from the solo project Sightseeing Crew from the man Andrew J. Vickers. And this is definitely a departure from the sounds of his first album, Let the Dead Stock Breathe. So the first album was more of like an experimental post-rock project. And while I saw and heard specifically like moments of greatness, and there was some bits of that album that you could tell that like the creative mind behind this project was incredibly talented. Overall, I do feel like independently of like me not being a huge post rock guy, but I felt like that was just, it was a very busy album. It lacked direction in some places. And I think, part of that comes with the territory of being like an experimental project, a post rock project. But there was moments that I did really, really enjoy on that album. It just wasn't for me. So when he reached out, letting me know he had a new album coming out, I was definitely excited because, in his own words, this was more of an indie psychedelic jazz rock album. So I was very curious to, hear what that was going to sound like going into this. Because again, I got, a lot of moments of brilliance on Let the Dead Stock Breathe. But overall, I felt like it needed some direction. I felt like it needed some groove. So to pivot to kind of like a new sound, a new style, I was very interested to see if the direction that I was hoping he was would go in would come through on this album. And I have to say, for the most part, I think it did. So my like initial opinion of this album, like the first time that I listened to it, was it is just a vibe. Like this, it's I think 12 songs, fairly decent length for those 12 songs, coming in at about 45 minutes. And it simultaneously feels like it moves through that 45 minutes pretty quickly, while also like kind of getting lost in its length, which I mean as a compliment. So again, very much like I think his description is very apt of it. It's a jazz rock album. There's like some fusion elements to it. There's definitely some more like psych elements to it as well. I get, even on a couple tracks, some like psych funk influences, sort of something that you'd get out of like Krungbin, specifically on the third track of Muffled Ears. And while there's not a ton of vocals on this album, the songs that do have vocals, for the most part, feel more like part of the melody itself, just sort of adding to the soundscape of the album, the track. But yeah, throughout the listen of this album, I kept thinking back to a line that Daniel Klederman gave me when I interviewed him last year, where like groove is everything. And I don't think that's necessarily true for every single genre, but I definitely kept thinking that while listening to this album from Sightseeing Crew, because man, does this album groove. This is really what I was hoping to see, again, coming out of like his last project, where I feel like this album, it's got more direction, it's got more of a flow, it's got a ton of groove. And like I said, it's just an overall vibe. It's chill, it's laid back, it's spacey in certain parts. You definitely get that psychedelic influence coming through, especially on some of the guitar parts. Like a lot of this is, piano and drums, and then, it is still like a jazz album, or at least a jazz rock album. So there's a lot of horns, and there's some strings, and there's some flute. And I think it all blends together really nicely. But on the few tracks where the guitar work really does come in, like on Bon Bon, it's absolutely killer, and you definitely get a lot of that psych rock influence. It's a super fun album. I think you definitely have to be into this kind of music. You have to be into the more spacey, progressive sort of like jazz rock that has some like smooth jazz fusion elements thrown in, but also can like kind of go in different places here and there. And there's some ups and downs. There's some like rapid tempo changes on a couple of the songs. But overall, like it's got a very consistent just feel and theme and sound throughout. Now that does get into probably like one of my only, I don't want to say complaints, but like small criticisms of the album, which it very much does like blend together to the point where like it's hard to really know where you're at in listening to it. Just because so many of the songs have such similar like tones and tuning for like some of the works, some of the drum parts are very similar. And there's definitely like a feeling of repetitiveness at certain parts, but it changes it up enough throughout the track list where like you'll have one that's very sort of like guitar driven, spacey, not like up tempo, but at least like a more sort of almost like danceable groove to the song, and then it'll like settle into like a slower, more sort of like chilled, laid back atmosphere, and it does that quite well. So there's never really a point in the album where I feel like it gets stale, but there definitely is some repetitiveness that I think holds it back just a little bit. I think there's a couple of moments on this album where I would get a part that I felt was super unique and it was super different, and then it just wouldn't last quite as long. But yeah, I mean, if you like this album, or at least like some songs on this album, like you're gonna like the whole thing because it's very well done. Again, it's very much like just a groove vibe album to like put on in the background. Again, not a ton of vocals, some lyrics. The vocals that you do get, and you get them on a few different songs, are very like Tom York adjacent. So again, there's a lot of just sort of like drawn out notes and almost like muffled in the pronunciation, and it again, I feel like it just adds more to the actual background of the song as opposed to like being front and center, which is great. I think it adds to the vibe of it a lot. But yeah, super fun. I listened to it a few times by now, and for this type of music, for this direction that he wanted to go into, I think it's killer. You can easily see his talent. I think that he played all the instruments on the album, at least as far as I know. And there's some really, really killer parts, especially when it comes in with like the horns. The drum work here is really, really good as well. Goes from like really simple, sort of like basic jazz drums to a little bit more sort of like almost hip hop parts and certain parts. Just with like the drums in particular, and then it like settles back in. You get some like more complicated parts, and it really there's a lot of songs where I feel like the drums are sort of the forefront and like taking a lot of the spotlight, but not shying away from the rest of the instrumentation either. There's a couple songs that like incorporate some flute, and I absolutely love that, especially if you're going to be doing like jazz rock, prog rock, anything in that vein. I think flute just goes so well with it. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this one. Again, I think you have to be in the right kind of mindset to go into an album like this because it's basically an instrumental album. There are vocals, but they're not many, and they're not super prevalent. It's very similar throughout, like the vibes, the sounds, the tones doesn't change up a ton, but it's great like background music. I think it's great driving music. Like the first few times I listened to it, I was driving, and yeah, I think it's a big step up from his first album. My only other small criticism, and I don't necessarily even think it's necessarily a criticism, but like just something I kind of pinpointed that I pulled from his first album as well, was there's definitely moments that feel really busy. Like there's just a lot of layers of sound, and there's like some random, not even like instruments, but random like background sounds kind of thrown in at certain points, which is not like a bad thing, and I think it does work in certain spots. But there's also some points on this album that I wish it was stripped back just a little bit, but a very, very small. And compared to Let the Dead Stock Breathe, I think he improved on that a lot on this album, and still had some fun, still threw in some sort of like wacky moments here and there, but overall kept the groove, kept the feel, kept the vibe of the album consistent throughout. So I'm gonna give it a B plus, which I think is almost like a full grade up from his last album, at least that I gave it. Definitely go check it out if you're into like psych funk, if you're into like jazz rock, like jazz fusion, sort of on the more like laid back, almost like smooth jazz fusion type of feel. Definitely one to check out, one to add to your listening rotation, and I'm pretty excited to see what he does next, because I think if he keeps building on these elements, keeps experimenting, but like continues this shift that I've seen into like some groove and some melody and getting a little bit more structured, I think he's just going to continue to pump out really, really, really good stuff. So that's going to be it for me, guys. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, I will talk to y'all later. Peace.